Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is an elderberry herbal tea blend from McNulty's, and it is very delicious, both hot and iced. And today is another hot and humid day, so I thought I'd go for the iced tea, um, and I'm not regretting it yet. It does look a little bit like wine or sangria or something, but it's not today. Um, I'm doing my wrap up of Jane Austen July. I did a bit of a check in mid-month so that I wouldn't do the whole stack of books in one shot, and that's good because I have a whole another stack of books. And I'm gonna start. First of all, let me tell you that I really enjoyed Jane Austen July again. I really hate the month of July, but this gives me something to look forward to. And like I said in my August TBR, I don't know if I'm quite done with Jane Austen for the next couple months. I might sneak in a few other books the next month or so, but we'll see. It's not like you have to stick to 1 month. But of course, the vast majority of Jane Austen related reading happens for me in July. Excuse me. And in this discussion, I'm only going to talk about one book that's actually written by Jane Austen. Most of these books are either sequels or, retellings of her novels. And one of them here is a mystery and kind of a more of a about Jane Austen herself. So I thought that was a pretty good mix. Oh, and there's a nonfiction in here. There is. Thankfully, I did one. I meant to do a lot more, but anyway, you know. So the first one is an ebook, and I know I've never embraced fully the whole ebook thing just because I really enjoy physical books. But this one I started reading in June, and I mostly looked at it on my phone. So when I was out and about and I had moments to wait, I would just read a few pages. I had to take a lot of bus and subway rides the past couple months, and there's always a bit of waiting involved, and other instances where pulling out a book was not impossible, but this was a lot more practical. So I do see the merits of ebooks. I just don't prefer it if I had to choose, but that's okay because this book was worthwhile, and it was the Year in Between by Christina Moreland. Moreland, it's great. I wonder if that's a pen name or if that's her real name, because that is such a Jane Austen name. So it's a Sense and Sensibility variation. There's the picture again. It looks a little bit like a penguin book, right? But it's not, I don't think. I think it's a self-published. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I just know that I got it on for really cheap. I hate saying really cheap, but yeah, I got a really decent price on for a Kindle version. I think that was the only way I had to access it. So I thought, well, let me do that. And there might have been a paperback available, but it was a little bit more than I want to spend. Possibly that happens sometimes. I am trying to save money where I can. Don't always succeed. Anyway, this book, as it said, it was a Sense and Sensibility variation. Sense and Sensibility, I love the story. And by the way, again, a little bit of spoilers ahead if you haven't read all of Jane Austen's novels, especially the big six. And so if you really, really don't want to hear spoilers, then just be warned. The Book of Sense and Sensibility has always been a book that I've really enjoyed, but Jane Austen does tend to do a thing where when the people get their guy, when the main female characters, the guys that they were after or were partially interested in, or whoever they're going to marry in the end, usually it's like there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens, and at the end, it sort of just cleans up. That's what Jane Austen's like. I'm not the first person to say this, that she was a very tidy person. When she gets to the end of her book, she's like, all right, let's see. I'm going to put them together. I'm going to, tie up some loose ends, and then we're going to move on. We're not going to get all splashy about their romance. It's just going to work. And that's fine. I actually appreciate that. I don't need too much emphasis. But it is a little odd how Marianne, throughout the book, thinks that Colonel Brandon is actually a good man. She would have liked him very much as a friend early on in the book, but then people started pushing him on her, even though they had quite an age difference. Even though in those days that happened sometimes. But she was very much of a romantic, actually, not a bit. And she meets another man who just, sweeps her off her feet. She just loves him. He's so romantic, etc. And Colonel Brandon is put, aside in her estimations altogether, and sometimes she's a little bit mean about him. She completely ignores him sometimes. The point is that, of course, her whirlwind romance with the other guy, falls to pieces after a while. Not her fault, really. And she does end up, after a while, getting very badly sick. And Colonel Brandon comes through not just for her in so many ways, but for the whole family. He's just really kind. And you realize that she appreciates that about him. But then suddenly it just seems like she transfers her affections, and about a year after all these events, she marries him. And that's okay. That can happen. But it does feel, there always did feel like a bit of a, okay, this happened and that's it. And I always said, well, I know she cared about him more, but did she settle? How did she feel? So, sorry, that was a really long sip. I'm quite thirsty. It's hot. I turned the AC off. But Marianne is, yeah, she's such a romantic. So this book obviously is not canon, or it's a fan fiction at best, but that's okay, because it really does fill in the blanks. What happened in between with Eleanor's marriage? How was that? What are the things that could have happened to other characters? And I don't want to give too much away because it was so enjoyable. I unexpectedly enjoyable. It was a bit long, actually, like Sense and Sensibility. So you would say, oh, it drags on a bit, but it actually made more sense to see how that particular relationship came to be. How it was almost like a long year of couples therapy for Marianne and Colonel Brandon before they finally got married. So, and then there were other things that happened too that cleans things up as well a little bit more. So I really like this book, and I hope that if you guys get a hold of it, that you like it too, because it's so hard to gauge what other people are going to like when it comes to these things. But I did, so there you go. Now, I mentioned last time that I watched the Netflix Persuasion, and I didn't hate it, but I really didn't like it, and I had just a need to detox. And so I read the actual book of Persuasion by Jane Austen, and I love this edition. Isn't it beautiful? I saw it, actually my friend got it when she was visiting. Sorry about my nails, by the way. They're a little discolored right now. The nail polish I had on previously left a little bit of marks. But anyway, they're getting kind of long too. So anyway, no one needs to hear about my nails. But I saw this in a bookshop when my friend was visiting. We went to Postman Books in Chelsea Market in the city in Manhattan, and I saw this edition. I said, I don't need another copy of Persuasion, but oh my goodness. So I ended up buying it. It's got, I guess, Anne Elliot in the front, and the back, Captain Wentworth, and it's like the water, the sea, etc. And of course the boat. I just think it's so beautiful. And what has been said, about what hasn't been said about Persuasion. I've said a lot about it. Last year I talked a lot about it. It is my favorite Jane Austen novel, even though Pride and Prejudice comes very close. And I just absolutely loved just living again with Anne Elliot and seeing the real Anne Elliot. So I'm not going to go on and on about it, just that it really helped to, clean out the cobwebs or whatever it is. Get all the from my impressions of that adaptation, and hope that, well, actually I did watch a number of adaptations, but I didn't manage to watch my favorite version in 95 with Amanda Root and Kieran Hines, and I will again. It feels to me more of a cold weather thing to watch, even though some things take place by the water. It is really more of a colder weather thing. So not that I can't watch it in summer, but anyway, I will. So that was wonderfully satisfying. And then I read, let's see, 2 different Pride and Prejudice sequels, I guess you would say. And my favorite one of these 2 was What Kitty Did Next by Carrie Cablian. And then the other one I read was The Clergyman's Wife by Molly Grilly. I had read a book of hers last year that I wasn't that crazy about. I mean, it was interesting, but it wasn't really my favorite book, but I didn't even realize it was the same writer. But let's start with What Kitty Did Next, because I really like this one. It is extremely close now in my favorite non-written by Jane Austen stories. the other Bennett sister is one of my very favorites, and this comes very, very close. It is like in my top tier. If I was going to do another tier ranking, it is in my top tier, um, because it's the other sister, the other Bennett sister, the next to youngest. So not quite the middle sister, but kind of the middle younger sisters. Anyway, I always think to myself, and maybe I'll make a separate video about this one day. I always think that even though everybody does all kinds of criticisms of the Bennett parents, and they are the most responsible, although Mrs. Bennett, see Kitty at Books and Things video about Mrs. Bennett, yeah, she's redeemable in a lot of ways. She does really have a point, even though she goes about things maybe the wrong way. And Mr. Bennett, if you can enjoy him on a first reading, but the more you think about it, you realize he's got some things to work on, and he should have done a lot of things differently in his bringing up his daughters and managing his estate, etc. But sometimes you forget that even though I love Elizabeth Bennet and her sister Jane, and how both of them are really put as the best of the sisters, I kind of think that even though, yes, they were young, so you have to give them a little bit of understanding. But I always thought that in the course of the story of Pride and Prejudice, and probably before that, that they really weren't great older sisters. I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't care at all about their younger sisters, but I feel like they were sometimes a little bit insulated with the two of them. They loved each other so much, they were so close, and they cared very much about their younger sisters, but maybe left them out a little bit. And you see at the end of Pride and Prejudice, it is mentioned that once Lydia married and in the North and out of the picture for a while, and so she doesn't have an influence on Kitty anymore. That Kitty actually becomes, they say, influenced by her older sisters. They finally take an interest in her and let her visit them, and she gets a little bit better. And that's important. That's an important point, because she and Mary are not absolutely horrible people. And I mean, Lydia's pretty horrible, but she's also quite young. But but this story does exactly what you hope to have happened for Kitty. What would have happened once her sisters got married, and now she is at home with her sister Mary, who they're not extremely close, and her parents, and of course everybody's probably looking at her like, are you next? Maybe you gonna find someone? And she didn't have really a lot of prospects. She didn't have a lot going for her. She felt probably a little bit abandoned by her sister, who just up and eloped and then really didn't think of her very much. So she didn't have anyone to lean on, as it were. So then she does end up visiting first with Jane, and they stay in London for a while, and then eventually going up to Pemberley with the Darcys, and she becomes friends with Georgiana. In the meantime, she also gets a bit of an education. She does a bit more reading than she used to, and learns a lot more about music. And that's what I really want to tell you, because there's a lot that happens that is more pleasant surprises that I don't want to give away. Please get a hold of this if you can, if you're interested in unofficial sequels. And I thought, delightful. I thought it was great. I don't think it was incredibly unrealistic. It just shows what a kind of potential one has and how one is influenced by their friends. And I don't want to give away too much, but it does somewhat redeem Mr. Bennet in ways that are reasonable. Like this could have happened. And Mrs. Bennet also, I think, is pretty well portrayed in this one. So I enjoyed it, had a few laughs, but I thought it wasn't like a depressingly tragic book, but it also wasn't just one big, but it had a lot of, I just thought it was good. Anyway, then of course The Clergyman's Wife, it was not horrible, but it was incredibly sad, because I always felt like Charlotte Lucas is the one who settles. Charlotte Lucas is the one who takes Elizabeth's leftovers, as it were. Elizabeth rejects Mr. Collins, understandably so, and Charlotte sees herself in her late 20s, which in those days was an absolute, disaster, being a spinster, and no other opportunities. So she basically makes herself available to this guy, and he does have prospects because he is the one who's going to inherit Longbourn, where the Bennets live. And so there is a bit of an investment there in this man, but he's just an insufferable, just not a mean person, but just a silly, not the best example of a clergyman, boring as anything, and but she's not looking for romance, so that's okay, right? This takes you 3 years after their marriage, when they have a daughter. Yes, I know, if you know the rules of the entail, that's a bit of a, okay, just a daughter. And she's just living her life as a clergyman's wife. Mr. Collins is the same. I was really hoping for a little more, I hate to use the word redemption constantly, but a little more growth on his part, giving away things. But if you want that, maybe the other Bennet sister is where to go. And Charlotte's just living this kind of dull life. She meets a sort of a groundskeeper type of person who listens to, well, who is taken on the planting of some roses at their home by the instructions of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Yes, she's very much in this book. Still very Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and that's okay. There is one brief scene where Charlotte notices her looking at her daughter Anne at one point with a bit of alarm, and she realizes that she is a caring mother. It's a very, very quick thing, but I kind of like that a little bit. But that's it. She meets this man and starts to just have sort of feelings that she hasn't had before, and just starts to take an interest in people in her area, her village, or whatever, which is something a clergyman's wife should do. But she doesn't really have much of an example in her husband. So I did find that interesting. Like, what would you do if you were her? I mean, she did seem to have things mapped out in Pride and Prejudice, where she had her own space and she spent as little time as possible with her husband. So she had her own little life. And it was settling, but it was still acceptable for her. But this made it so much, I don't know, just so much bleaker in my opinion, so much sadder. So I thought, like, it wasn't horrible, but it felt, I don't know, like there was a little bit of hope here and there. There's lessons that she learns that could be applicable to her future life. But I also feel like it was just, you know what I mean? She's settled, and of course, the Bennet sisters do so much better, but she's just kind of in this situation. So I didn't hate it. I read it really quickly, actually. It was like within, I think, maybe one evening, maybe the next day a little bit. Definitely the greater part of one evening. And that was it. So it was a quick read. If you're looking for a quick Jane Austen based read, I guess that's good. But I don't know. It wasn't necessarily like a happy quick read. I don't know. Oh my goodness. So thirsty. Anyway, booktubing is thirsty word. So, the next one is a mystery again. This is the latest Jane Austen mystery by Stephanie Barron, Jane and the Year Without a Summer. I skipped many. I read the first one. I did not finish the second one last year. And then I just went ahead to this one. So I have an indication that there were some interesting stories in between. And this one was a pretty good one. If you know anything about the Regency period and Jane Austen's life, and maybe the writers of that time period, 1816 was a year where there was a massive volcanic explosion very much east of England, but it affected Europe and a good portion of the summer was messed up. They didn't have much of a summer. It was very bleak, very rainy, colder, and not great for, I guess, for agriculture maybe. But the reason why, excuse me, summer. The reason, I'm like, I wouldn't mind a year without a summer, but that also would be depressing. But anyway, the reason why I remembered this time more than anything is because that's the summer that a number of writers and friends went out to another part of Europe and got together and challenged each other to write a certain type of story. And this led to Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein, which is pretty important. So, and it was all because of just having to spend a lot of time indoors because there was really nothing much to do outdoors. So that was interesting, but it was also kind of sad because this is when Jane Austen started really having her health issues that were ultimately to kill her. So this is a time period where it seems like she and Cassandra, her sister, went to Cheltenham Spa, which is maybe a slightly closer or slightly less, I don't know, budgety, maybe a little more budgety compared to Bath. I don't know. Um, to take the waters, they used to drink this thaw water. It was disgusting, but some people thought it was healing. And then there were usually a lot of healthcare people in these towns and places to relax. So it, you think it'd be a good idea, but in the long run, obviously, it didn't do much for her. But so she and Cassandra go to this place, and they're staying in a place with this brother and sister who are just very annoying and have a little dog, and this very wealthy woman who has a friend and assistant that is helping her out, and there's a lot more to that story that meets the eye. And then another lady who works in the theater coaching people. She's got a whole story. And another man who is who has been injured, but he is in the military and has some connections to Jane Austen's brother Charles, which is actually quite helpful because he had a bit of trouble. So there's all this interaction, and then there are poisonings. There are mysterious poisonings, and then someone gets murdered, and Jane Austen is on hand to help figure out what happened. There's a masquerade ball that is quite interesting, and so there's a dance. It's always important to have some kind of dancing involved, even with an older Jane Austen. I say older, she's only in her early 40s, but for her that was quite older, or she might have, I think she was maybe 40 here. And there were a lot of setbacks around this time for the Austen family, a lot of financial setbacks, so that probably wasn't helpful for her. But I thought it was not like the most intriguing mystery. I figured out basically who done it pretty quickly, but I thought it was nice to have the fictionalized version of what was happening in Jane Austen's life at this point, trying to find a solution to her health problems, and then to no avail. It's always been a tragic thing to me that she had to deal with that. And then of course, I wanted a little bit of biography about Jane Austen, and so I finished The Real Jane Austen, A Life in Small Things by Paula Byrne, who is a very interesting writer. She takes objects, not always tiny things, but she has things like a laptop, which is more of like a writing desk, a small portable writing desk, which was important. So it talks a little bit about Jane Austen's history of her writing. And it talks about theatrical scenes and gets into the Austen family and how they were involved, and also how Mansfield Park was influenced by that, for instance, and all kinds of objects that are related to Jane Austen's cousin Eliza, who had quite an interesting background, and just all through her life, something connected her. Influential friends, people who contributed to her writing, even spoke of a woman whose name I'm not remembering. It might have been Mary Ben or something like that. Another unmarried woman who had even less support than the Austen ladies, but she was, even though she died pretty young, she was able to come over and be a part of some of the readings of, I believe it was Pride and Prejudice, and though I don't think she ever really knew exactly what a big deal that was, the fact that her name, this person who would have been like Miss Bates, except even more bleaker circumstances, someone who was just so in her own life probably so insignificant to other people, and yet she became a part of Jane Austen history. So she has like a bit of, just a part, somehow she is known by modern readers, at least some modern readers. And I thought that was pretty fascinating because her name comes up a number of times in here. I thought that was one of my favorite things about the book. I thought it was good. I don't know if it was my very favorite of the Jane Austen nonfiction, stories of her life, but it wasn't a bad one. I wouldn't say this was the first one I would recommend as a biography. There's a number of other biographies that I would probably recommend. I should maybe one day do a video just about that. But definitely a good book. And so, yeah, it was even with The Clergyman's Wife, which was probably one of my least favorite of the books that I read in July, even so, it was all in all a very enjoyable reading month, and I'm always happy to participate in Jane Austen July. Now, of course, I'm widening out again because it's August, but that's okay. I can always go back to Jane Austen whenever I want, and I also have Victober to look forward to, so it's all good. So that's all for now. Let me know what you have been reading lately, and if you participated in Jane Austen July, what's your favorite book? What would you recommend of all the books you read in July? Yeah. If you like talking about Jane Austen, classic, especially English literature, but other things as well. Not too much Regency, but the occasional Regency. And if you like talking about tea, please subscribe. And that is all for now. I'm going to put the AC back on and gulp down very unattractively the rest of my iced tea, but it is really good. So that is all for now. This is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day. Bye.